Once again, my name is Justin Zahradka. I'll be a senior next year at NDSUCREC Center of Crop and Weed Sciences. So I've grown cover crops for the past 4 years. The goal of these projects has been to graze cattle in the fall and weigh them before and after they graze on the cover crop to determine their daily rates of gain. And I've also been collecting soil data to determine nitrogen fixation and different soil properties that have been affected. So what is a cover crop? I'd say, to me, a cover crop is any crop that is grown to protect the soil from the elements and to improve the quality of it. There's really a cover crop for any farming situation that you may have. It's up to you to find what will work best for the fields that you have and your kind of farming operation. And when you start growing cover crops, the first thing you want to do is look at what are your goals. Do you want to control the erosion, improve fertility, enhance soil health, manage moisture, grazing livestock? Obviously, we're going to focus on grazing livestock today, but you need to realize that not only are you getting high quality feed through livestock, you're going to get all these other benefits as well. You're keeping the soil covered, obviously, to prevent erosion. If you have legumes in this cover crop mix, you'll add nitrogen to the soil. The extra biomass out there is going to increase organic matter, microbial activity, so on. Managing moisture, it works both ways. If you have excess moisture, you can plant cover crops that'll use that moisture so you can get in the field earlier the next growing season. And if you're drier, you can plant cover crops to increase organic matter and the water holding capacity of your soil. So it works both ways. And then obviously grazing livestock, and that's a picture of the cover crop mix I had this summer. So I'll go through the past 4 years of cover crops that have grown. I started in 2011. This was a field of 40 acres. That was CRP breakout. So I broke up the CRPs throughout the summer, and then in July I went in and planted radishes, turnips, barley, sorghum, Sudan grass, peas, and sunflowers. And how I did this was I just used a Terrigator, broadcasted the seed at 20 pounds per acre, and I supplemented the seed with 30 pounds of nitrogen. And yes, the nutrients in the soil were depleted from the CRP, but that wasn't my main goal for fertilizing. It was to carry the seed through the Terrigator so it would have a better establishment through the wings on the Terrigator. I simply harrowed the field once to create the seed-to-soil contact, and it rained that evening, which jump-started the cover crop. Obviously, that's the most limiting factor in cover crops, is getting moisture to get the crop established. So I grazed this cover crop from October 9th to November 11th. Here's just a picture of establishment. You see nothing fancy. The harrow is probably 50 years old, so you can use the equipment you have or your neighbors and get the job done. Here's the growth after 9 days. It doesn't look very significant, but you got to realize with cover crops, once they get established, get up and growing, they will really take off, and that's evident with this next picture. This is on September 14th after 54 days of growth. The average frost is about September 14th to 15th in my area, so obviously this is adequate growth before the first frost occurs. So I began grazing on October 9th. There was sorghum Sudan grass in this mix, so you have to be careful with the prussic acid poisoning that's released when the cells burst in that sorghum Sudan grass. So you should wait about 1 to 2 weeks or until that grass dries down before you begin grazing that cover crop to prevent the toxicity in that. You can see how large those radishes and turnips got. The radish are on the outside, the turnips are on the inside. The radishes are penetrating 16 inches into the soil profile. Beyond that, they're about 1.5 inches diameter, and those turnips are about the size of a tennis ball. So that's going to improve your infiltration, reduce compaction, and so on. So here is just what the field looked like at the end of grazing, and there's the scale I used to weigh the cattle before and after. And here's the results. So I had 23 cow-calf pairs and 6 heifers grazing out there in 40 acres for 33 days. That's about 1.5 acres per pair. And you get to the results, keep an open mind here. Yes, the cows did lose 3/4 of a pound per day. Take what I'm telling you so you don't have that issue in the future. If you go back to that picture, there's not a lot of forage out there, so they probably were short on forage at the end of the grazing period, as well as the cows were still getting nourishment from them. So that's probably what's due to that. But then you go down, and the heifers gained about 1/2 pound, and then the steer calves, 1.5 to 2 pounds a day. So that's pretty significant and very economical as well. And there you see the beginning weights of those calves as well. So let's look at the cost of gain. I just took the seed, the application, and then harrowing and figured that and divided the price of cost by the pounds gained, and you come up with 83 cents a pound. So that's a little higher than I would like, but I reduced that cost in the future years.
When did you start grazing after your frost? Or when was your frost?
The frost was September 14th.
It was on the board.
Yep, and then I grazed it on October, so there's plenty of time in between that. So in 2012, you remember it was a dry year, ideal spring, so the crop got in early, so I was able to use a dual cropping. Those two pictures are of the same field from the wheat, and then I went in and planted radishes and turnips after that. And you can see the nice grazing there in the fall. So that wheat went in on April 11th, harvested on July 29th, and then I broadcasted the radishes and turnips again. Didn't do any tillage, just went out there, broadcasted it, and then harrowed it twice. Only 2 pounds per acre seed for that, so obviously your radish and turnip seed is very small, so you don't need very much of it. And then I had to put the urea with it just as a carrier to get the seed out of the interrogator. And then I harrowed the field twice just to create extra seed to soil contact since there was no tillage before. And then I was fortunate and it started raining as I left the field, which jump-started that cover crop. And I was able to get 34 days of grazing off this. So here's the growth. You can see those radishes and turnips getting started, and then it really takes off here. This is September 7th, about a month after planting. So you already have those taproots going down 8 inches or so, and then you got some volunteer weeds out there too. So very high quality forage right there. Here's September 23rd. Note the picture on the right there. That's a forage brassica. There's different types, as you saw in the slides before. You got those radishes with the large taproot and the turnips with like the tennis ball. This is like a brassica hybrid, so it puts more energy into creating biomass above ground rather than below ground, so it's more beneficial for forage use. Here's on October 14th, after 14 days of grazing, the growth there. And I did have a cross fence in, so obviously the picture on the right there wasn't being grazed, but it just shows how the radishes and turnips can still thrive in that wheat stubble. Here's the residue after grazing. You know, you still want to use that common take half, leave half principle, and then all those nutrients will return to the soil. So when I graze this, I use the same herd of cattle from the year before, except I split the herd so I had half graze on cover crop and half graze on hay, just like normal fall feeding would take place. And there are no supplements with the cover crop. So after a grazing period of 34 days, you look at these gains. How about that? 2.5 pounds for those steer calves, heifers about 2, heifers that were unbred 1.2, cows about 1.5 pounds. So very, very high quality feed. Take a look at the control group that was only fed hay. You know, the calves is kind of mixed. I'd say you still have an advantage on the cover crop side of that. The bred heifers and the cows gain a lot more, but you're also paying a lot more for that hay, or you know, it still costs to get those extra pounds. So when you break it down further, the cost of gains come out pretty much the exact same. So, you know, plus you're not taking labor into account, so you know, the cover crop's a better option because you're not out there feeding hay to those cows every day. So a lot simpler, better for the soil. Here's just a picture. The field is covered. The cover crop has residue. It does catch snow, but it doesn't catch too much, which is going to prevent you from getting into the field in the following spring. I forgot to mention, after 2011, that cover crop, I was able to get in the field about 7 to 10 days earlier than a field just across the road because that cover crop absorbed the excess soil moisture in it.
If you had put in shorter maturing, like instead of, you said you use spring wheat?
Yep.
What if you use like shorter, like winter wheat or barley, and got in there like 2 weeks earlier, like a week and a half? You think that would increase your tonnage on your cover crops?
Definitely.
Stuff like that, increase grazing?
Yep, and that's like, if you really get into this, rotations like that are ideal, where you can get that cover crop planted earlier. Yep, because you'll get more grazing, more growth. We'll go into the 2013 cover crop. This is a different field. This is 35 acres of breakout hayland. On this I put a nitrogen building mix. Had 9 different species in it: radish, turnip, peas, lentils, soybeans, clover, millet, oats, and sunflower. And I got this in pretty early, July 19th. Broadcasted that again, 30 pounds an acre, and no urea with that. So, and I grazed it from September 28th to November 10th. Here's the growth after 14 days. It's not quite as much as the previous 2 years because it rained about 5-6 days after it was broadcasted, but still had good emergence on that. On August 30th, here's the growth. Look at those taproots on the radish, and that's a nice standout there after 42 days. September 14th, 57 days. That's quite interesting mix out there. You can see it is starting to head out, which is one disadvantage of planting it earlier. You don't want to let that go to seed, so that's where the grazing comes in, so you don't have a problem with that. September 29th, finally started grazing, and plenty of forage out there, and it was very high quality too. Get into that. Here's just a picture of what it looks like as calves graze out there, and what's left after they're done. So this year I had 20 steers, beginning weight about 800 pounds. They grazed for 43 days. Average daily gain 2.2, just about. So I did send a sample of this forage into NDSU. Got the relative feed value back, was 164. I should have had an RFQ, a relative feed quality, which includes digestibility, but this still gives an idea of what was out there. If you look at this, crude protein 11.2, so definitely adequate for those steers. And kind of low fiber because it was a legume-based cover crop, so that was pretty digestible, and obviously that's reflected in the daily gain. And the cost for this one ended up being 59 cents a pound, and if you look on the bottom there, the end credit, I'll get to that. The nitrogen building mix put 20 pounds of nitrogen back into the soil. So I'll explain how I determined this. When I was planting this cover crop, with the Terrigator, just went through a pass and did not seed anything there. So I took a soil test from where the cover crop was planted and a soil test from where there was no cover crop. So I would have those numbers, and I'll get into the data here. So the first year in 2013, when I didn't, or before I planted, I took the soil test, and that had 8 pounds actual nitrogen per acre. So obviously not much coming out of that hayland. And then in 2014, the soil test, where there was no cover crop, was 38 pounds, and where there was cover crop, it's 58 pounds. So that's where you get your 20 pound end credit from. If you put that into dollars using urea at 54 cents, it's about $23 an acre. So that's a pretty good deal. In addition, on the soil tests, the pH was decreased and phosphorus increased, obviously because of the cows excreting their waste. The pH, I have a high pH and kind of saline soils, so the pH went from 8 to 7.8. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, but that's pretty significant for just 1 year. And this is where that strip of cover crop to no cover crop, obviously that first-hand effects of what that residue does for preventing erosion.
Why are you broadcasting and dragging in versus direct seeding your cover crop?
I don't have equipment.
Okay.
So that's the main reason, and it's quicker too, more efficient.
Okay.
It's probably a little cheaper because I did drill it this next year, and I'll get into that too.
Okay.
So, but that's the main reason why I just do the broadcasting. So 2014, this is that same field again, same 35 acres, and this time I just put radishes, Sudan grass, and sun hemp. Just to be honest, sun hemp is a warm season legume, more adapted down south. Wouldn't recommend it for North Dakota. So this cover crop I drilled in on July 6th. That was all. And that kind of goes to your question too. In this cover crop, the seed was all relatively the same size, so it went through the drill. And then in those other mixes with 9 things, it's hard to set your seeder right for that too. So that's another thing. Put it in at about 1 inch deep, 20 pounds an acre, and then I was able to graze this September 8th to October 18th, and the relative feed value on this was 121. So there's a picture of what it looked like when I was drilling in, and that's on that same ground as the year before, so you can see how quick the residue breaks down from this stuff too. So don't have a problem with that. And there's just a picture of the establishment on the bottom. So here's July 31st, 25 days, and then I was lucky I drilled it this year because after I drilled it in on July 6th, it didn't rain for about 3 weeks, and you can see it still grew because it got into that inch deep and got some moisture so it could germinate. Here's a picture on August 8th. You can see the radish leaves, and then there, those two there. That's the sun hemp, what that looks like, and then you got the Sudan grass in there as well. Where'd the calves go? This is when I started grazing. The calves are standing up. This is after 64 days of growth. It's pretty cool to see. I turned 70 head in there at once and couldn't find them for 5 days, but they were in there. So there was a lot of forage produced. That's just a picture of how tall it was. That's chest high in me. That's at least 4 feet. So a lot of good growth out there. Here's October 5th, 27 days of grazing. I did have different paddocks that I separated those acres into to increase the grazing efficiency. Here's what it looked like at the end. So from 4 feet, not a whole lot left out there, but still enough to cover the soil, and all that biomass and nutrients is going back into the soil through the cattle too. It just speeds up the whole process. So the results from this one: 53 steers, 35 heifers, only 0.4 acres per head over that grazing period. The steers and heifers both gain about 1.5 pounds a day. You know, from compared to the year before, that's less, but look at the relative feed value, that's also less, so it corresponds with that. And I was able to measure how many tons of dry matter per acre produced in 2.7 tons of dry matter, so that was very nice to see. Then I did measure the daily rate of gain as the calves grazed on native pasture grass during the summer, and that was only 0.8 pounds per day, so basically doubled their gain during the fall there. And there were no growth in plants on these calves either. So here's the relative feed value for this one. You can see if you compare these numbers to the relative feed value of a sedan grass, they're virtually the same because that kind of was the dominant species in that cover crop. So the crude protein about 9, and then the fiber was a little more, which reduced digestibility slightly. Here's the cost of gain on this one. It turned out to be 58 cents per pound. Okay, so here's the soil benefits. You know, look at all those earthworms, microbial activity. That's not something you can find in every field. So very interesting what's going on below ground up there. Here's just another picture. It's kind of hard to see all these little bumps here. That's all earthworm castings. So that just gives you an idea what the populations are, what's really going on. You know, obviously more earthworms, microbial activity. It's going to speed up your mineralization. You're going to get those nutrients back available to the plant much quicker that way. Here just shows all those little white, they're all just little fungal structures on there, so that just goes to show how much food is out there for the microbes in the soil. So considerations, we'll get into this. You got moisture, obviously I said if it doesn't rain, it doesn't grow. Pretty self-explanatory. Equipment, use what you have, make it the most economical you can. You can get the seed out there anyway, it's just, you know, you pay more, drill it, know that it's going to come up, or you broadcast it, take your chance. Germination, obviously you want to start grazing or clip the cover crop or do something so it doesn't go to seed, so it doesn't become a weed the following year. Toxins in forage, I mentioned prussic acid and sort of sedan grass, so if you don't want to deal with that, don't plant sedan grass. Millet might be a better option. Insects and disease, fencing, herbicides, I got more slides on those. Insurance, that might be an issue. Make sure that the cover crop you plant doesn't prevent you from getting insurance on your cash crop the next year if you do that. If you have a preventive plant situation, you can't graze that cover crop until November 1st. If you do graze it before that, you lose part of your payment, so keep that in mind. Cost, there are NRCS, EQIP programs, things like that, that pay you to plant the cover crop. I've benefited from that the last 3 years. Here's a few problems. Further north, there's a lot of canola, so you have a lot of flea beetles, which you feed on the radishes and turnips, which are in the same family as canola. However, this hasn't been an issue. There's been flea beetles out there, but it hasn't been an issue. I did have a bigger issue with the diamondback moss, and this was the first year I did this. Those insects, they blow up from the south with the wind, so it just happened that year they got this far north. And they did end up eating probably 30% of the forage on the radishes and turnips. However, after the first frost occurred, it killed the bugs, and then the radishes and turnips, which are frost tolerant, continued to grow, so it regrew. So there really wasn't a forage loss out there. Disease, that goes back to the canola in my area. The radishes and turnips are a host for club roots and canola, which is emerging further north. So, you know, if that comes further this way, you won't be able to grow radishes and turnips. Also, white mold, just keep whatever kind of species you're planting in the cover crop. Just weigh the cost and benefit of if they're susceptible to white mold or not. Fencing, what I did is I made a little rig for the four-wheeler. So just made stepping posts out of rebar and a little mounting thing. I got 5 of those, so it goes real quick to put in post. On the end of that there, you just attach the spool of wire so I can drive along. The wire unrolls, you step the posts in, you do about 30 acres in 2 hours, so it goes real quick. And I just use poly wire so you can unroll it, roll it back up, move it someplace else, super convenient. Herbicide restrictions, this is kind of a big issue. Any pre or post-emerge herbicides that have that residual carryover, you got to be careful with kind of species of cover crops you're planting, and obviously the label's going to tell you if you can or can't plant it. So you can kind of look at the herbicide half-life to determine if the cover crop is okay to plant or not. If the half-life of the herbicide is less than 30 days, you shouldn't have any issues with planting. So if the total restriction of the herbicide is less than 4 months for planting, you shouldn't have an issue. So an example of that would be like Liberty. If you have Liberty corn, soybeans, and you go and put a cover crop in the fall, you should be okay. And obviously there's no issue with glyphosate.